for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
And welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.tv. Thank you for joining me this evening. Last broadcast we went over the Brexit, and well, we kind of still are having all kinds of, let's say, chaos in the EU. Are more countries going to leave? Can we impose a Eurozone superstate? Where is this going to go? And there's a lot of great information already out there. There is a clip out because lately it seems that George Soros' name keeps popping up in a lot of different places. And we kind of know how Soros, or at least organizations that he tends to be linked to, nonprofits and stuff, tend to have money in places where chaos happens. And he, from all indications, is a much eager person to push for a world order. He has said quite a few things that let you know that he definitely doesn't look at the common man as someone to worry or care about. Pretty egotistical, my opinion, but you know, the evidence is out there if you look hard enough. I want to get into this clip that Christopher Green put out. I'm not going to cover the whole clip though because it is quite long. It's about an hour long, but we'll probably play. Really only want to do around a half hour. I might let it go over just a little bit, but we have a few articles here. Sorry if I can get this to pop up. My browsers have not been friendly with me for probably almost 6 months now. Constant upgrading. Probably because I refused to upgrade my Windows. Sorry, I'm having all kinds of issues here. Part of it was that website. Don't sit on reason.com's homepage for too long. Okay, it's not wanting to pop up. I'm gonna have to try to find it again. But we have quite a few people that have come out in support of the Brexit that have been demonized. Of course, Nigel Farage, because he had been someone from the beginning that was saying this is a corrupt system, that the top people here at the EU get a rule over other people, and then you can also be outvoted in parliament by other countries, forcing your country to have to go along with, you know, something that might be nonsense. And sorry again, here we go. Just trying to get my browsers back up here. But we're still seeing chaos in the markets and over in EU, definitely among the elite. They are frantic right now. Um, when we look at this whole situation, it's a boiling pot. It's going to lead to a little bit of chaos. I want to play this short clip, this one, just a few minute clip, reality check from Ben Swan. And this has to do with NAFTA. Now, you understand what the Brexit is, and NAFTA is one of those steps. We know that the EU, you know, did not just become the EU, it was a trade deal, a partnership trade deal that they slowly kept changing it to the point where it created a political power over countries rather than a agreement of free trade among countries. Listen, you want free trade with a country, the only way to get that is for government to step aside on both sides. Of course, government's not going to do that. So what they do, they go, well, let's try to make this deal where, what are we doing in? Oh, we'll just let the big corporations help write this trade deal, and it really does create a body that gets power hungry. That's what business is. You're trying to become the best. You're competitive. But when it's not free market and it's becomes a political power structure, you're able to use this, you know, imposed force and coercion upon countries and people. That's dangerous. And this whole NAFTA trade and the even like the TPP and stuff, it's all steps towards that. Um, let's play this reality check real quick.
Well, Donald Trump made what was probably his most specific speech this week, and the focus was on the economy and trade. Now, the speech signaled what would be one of the most dramatic changes in U.S. economic policy in many decades. But how realistic is it? This is a reality check you won't see anywhere else.
NAFTA was the worst trade deal in the history. It's like the history of this country. And China's entrance into the World Trade Organization has enabled the greatest job theft in the history of our country.
Donald Trump there speaking at an aluminum plant in Pennsylvania this week. Trump attacked trade deals like the TPP, NAFTA, and China's manipulation of currency. Certainly, it was a populist message. Today, I'm giving 3 of Trump's statements a reality check.
When subsidized foreign steel is dumped into our markets, threatening our factories, the politicians have proven, folks, have proven they do nothing.
Well, so President Trump would make sure that steel used to build American buildings comes from America. But as a businessman who has built many skyscrapers, Trump hasn't always done that. According to Wayne Barrett's Trump, the Deals and the Downfall from 1991, Trump actually chose to build Trump Tower with concrete instead of Pennsylvania steel because the cost was too high. Dur Scott, the architect for the project, explains that Trump decided not to use steel to save money, saying, quote, when you change steel, you have to send it back to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and it comes back 5 weeks later. To do it in steel would have been prohibitively expensive.
Hillary Clinton was totally for the TPP just a short while ago. But when she saw my stance, which is totally against, she was shamed into saying she would be against it too.
Well, Trump went on to talk about the trade deal that is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He says he was on the side of Brexit and Hillary Clinton is not. And that's true. He also says that he has been opposed to the TPP and that Clinton, before she was against it, was for it. That's also true. In fact, at least 45 times, yes, 45, Clinton praised the Trans-Pacific Partnership before she decided that she is against it. Just one example here, big or small, we're standing up for an economic system that benefits everyone when our negotiators ensure that the new Trans-Pacific Partnership requires that state-owned enterprises compete under the same rules as private companies. And finally is the issue of NAFTA. Trump says that he will renegotiate NAFTA, and if other nations are unwilling to do so, then he will exercise his authority to end the U.S. participation in NAFTA. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, it was signed by President Clinton. Trump is connecting Hillary Clinton to NAFTA. But historically, while it's important that while Clinton signed NAFTA, it was pushed and created by George H.W. Bush. Trump calls NAFTA the worst trade deal in history, and maybe it is.
This wave of globalization has wiped out totally our middle class. It doesn't have to be this way. We can turn it around, and we can turn it around fast.
So what you need to know here is whether or not you like Donald Trump or you loathe him. It is an irrefutable fact that the outsourcing of jobs and manufacturing over the past 30 years has without question destroyed America's middle class. NAFTA, it caused a direct outsourcing of more than 700,000 American jobs. But folks, NAFTA did much more than that because it also created the framework for other trade deals like CAFTA. NAFTA's principles were applied to the World Trade Organization and to the policies of the World Bank and the IMF. And those principles created the framework under which employers of China's huge supply of low-wage workers were allowed access to U.S. markets in exchange for allowing American multinational corporations the right to invest there. And again, who's at fault for the disaster that is NAFTA? A Republican president who created the framework, a Democratic president who signed it. That's Reality Check. Let's talk about that tonight on Twitter.
And again, we see both sides play this. They worked for this because you have the progressive globalist type people in there. They really believe in centralizing power, that they're the upper class, that they are smarter, more intelligent, and superior to you. You have that. You see it. You see it in the Clintons. You see it in the Feinstein. You just see how they act. And they have that, I'm above you. they don't even try to play that, you know, they're just like you, what Clinton does, when it suits her. The rest of the time, she's, you know, it's amazing. Definitely when you see this election cycle, and you're like, Clinton and Trump, really, Clinton and Trump, and you have Trump saying legitimate things, and we're still looking and going, but it's still Hillary and Trump. Well, you don't forget about Gary Johnson over there. He is polling very well. I've seen a lot of articles actually starting to come out talking about it. Now, I do want to get to this one clip. And I haven't been able to find the article I had up. I can't remember what site it was on. Oh, yeah, I think it was by Paul Joseph Watson, maybe. Who was it by? Let's go to InfoWars, see if it came out. Yeah, right here. Let me click on it. Right here, InfoWars, Paul Joseph Watson, suspected Istanbul attack mastermind was a refugee protected by the EU. The suspected mastermind behind the ISIS attack on the Istanbul airport that claimed the lives of 44 people was a refugee who was protected by the European Court for Human Rights after Russia tried to have him extradited. Chechen national Ahmed Chatev was a Russian terrorism watch list since 2003, but received asylum in Austria after he claimed that he was severely tortured and under persecution from Russian authorities. He was later arrested in Sweden after Kalashnikov assault rifles, explosives, and ammunition were found in his car. But he only spent just over a year in prison. 2010, he was arrested in Ukraine with his mobile phone files containing a demolition technique instruction and photos of people killed in a blast, reports RT. Russia requested his extradition on terrorism-related charges, but the European Court for Human Rights ordered Ukraine not to hand him over to Russia, with Amnesty International also urging Ukrainian authorities to halt extradition as Chatev could face an unfair trial and would be at risk of torture and other ill treatment. Russia again tried to extradite a year later and was crossing the border between Turkey and Bulgaria, but human rights groups pointed to his refugee status in Austria to block Moscow from getting their man. And this is after he's been caught with weapons. So there's a lot of reasons for Britain leaving the EU, and the immigration one is just a small slice of it, like we talked about last broadcast, but it's an important thing. But now we have I have a clip here. This one's from AMTV. George Soros ushers in New World Order. Here we go. Maybe. Not sure what's going on here. Let me try to reload it here. Sorry about that. That was a commercial.
Hey, everybody. I'm Christopher Green, and you're tuning into AMTV Live. It is Thursday, top of the hour, 1 p.m. Arizona time, 1 p.m. Pacific. It's great to be back. Thank you so much for all of you tuning in. We're having a blast doing these live streams. Again, that's Tuesdays and Thursdays from 1 to 2 p.m. $5 billion criminal corporations that make up the one-party system and the one-party media that is CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC, owned by the same scumbags. The only people that we are beholden to are you. And I view the media that we present to the world as a public service, not just a patriotic duty here in the United States, but a duty to the world. You can change everything by supporting us, by sharing our content, by giving a big F you, by helping us go to war with the mainstream media. You know, someone asked me, and I talked about this on Facebook, they said, Christopher, does it ever frustrate?
Let me try to get to the part. Okay, here we go.
It's not independent. George Soros, reported by CNBC today, Brexit tragedy no longer looks like fait accompli, if I'm saying that correctly, from George Soros. The Brexit vote was a negative shock, but the tragedy no longer looks like a fait accompli. Check my pronunciation on that. George Soros said in a speech at the European Parliament on Thursday, and it has created positive momentum for a stronger and better Europe. That's right, according to George Soros. He added that over 4 million people have petitioned Parliament to hold a second referendum. By the time the parliamentary debate on this petition takes place, it's not inconceivable that more people will have signed the petition than voted for Brexit. Well, wait a minute. So he's actually talking about something that I talked about, was that the people, even though they voted leave, as the establishment kind of massages this and masturbates this narrative, will actually hold another vote, potentially, that will vote stay. You see, the leavers will get cold feet, think they need the Eurozone bloc. They'll need a EU superstate, a one-world government, army, the dissolution of its right to tax, countries to tax themselves, one central bank in the form of the ECB, all these things. We'll see the light as things begin to unravel, a process that could take through Article 50, a minimum of 2 years up to 10 years. Remember I said you can't let these people buy any time? You can't let them buy time. That's what the people can do to keep the ball rolling here, the levers, an organic movement, an organic populist movement. Is saying there could be a negative vote, and it could actually sway to stay. Really convenient, George Soros. Tremendously convenient. Soros further added that while the popular vote cannot be reversed, a signature-collecting campaign could transform the political landscape for EU membership. Quote, this approach, foundly restructuring it. A restructuring. New World Order. Singular world government. One army. The dissolution of sovereign borders. Interesting. Could this perhaps be the European superstate I talked about in the last few videos? The United States of Europe! They need to strengthen it. You need to give people like Angela Merkel more power. George Soros more power. The ECB, the European Central Bank that currently has negative interest rates in place, more power. 11.4, if I remember correctly, trillion bonds in existence today with a negative yield. And people are like, oh, there'll be no consequences to it. We're just fine. An artificial recovery. $11.4 trillion plus of bonds with negative yields. Again, don't believe me? Hit your friends in the face with facts, folks. Again, quotes, direct quotes from George Soros. Pull this article up. Brexit tragedy no longer looks like fait accompli. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I really don't know. I don't give a shit, to be honest. The message is what's important. George, this is what I think about you, my friend. I think you're a piece of shit. That's right. Love to interview you, though. In fact, you're welcome here on AMTV. I'll go to war with you, too. Not afraid of you. You're pretty old, too. I think you're about to die. Get a lot of comments like people are like, God, how long is this guy going to stay alive? What is he got, like 5 heart transplants or something like that? Evil man. Very evil man. Funds these radical opposition movements. In fact, I pointed this out not long ago. RT had me on their show. I don't think that they thought that I was actually going to point a finger at the scumbag that made up George Soros. Probably caught him by surprise. Even though I like RT and it does provide, you know, an alternative to establishment mainstream news. We'll have to do a lot more work with them. In fact, I've been asked to come on their program, and now that we've got the set here, and we've got the facility, and we've got the equipment, and again, you're supporting it, you're going to see me all over the mainstream news. People thought Andrew Breitbart was like this avant-garde guy who, or I found to be a tremendous inspiration. Well, I'm pretty much like times 1,000, completely uncensored, unfiltered. AMTV, alternative media television. Again, George Soros, you're a freaking scumbag. Proof is in the pudding, folks. Again, hit your friends in the face with facts because they can't argue with them. And when they tell you something like negative about Donald Trump or negative about, and believe me, folks, I'll dig into Donald Trump. Hey, Facebook, we're also broadcasting live on Facebook right now, not just YouTube. That's the thing with the alternative media. I take shots all the time at Donald Trump. People are well aware of this. I support him. I take shots at him all the time. You see, I'm not loyal necessarily to one group or the other. If you give me a reason to attack you, I will. If you expose yourself as a scumbag, or you just make a mistake, just like people will criticize me, and I make a mistake, and I'm not perfect, I'll point that out. That's the difference between a slanted media. You know, they say, oh, like even Fox, they're supposed to be balanced or something. They're not balanced at all. I think the important concept, the idea of alternative media, that there really is no loyalty to a certain degree, that there is some balance and open criticism and fomentation of ideas. I mean, and that's what people I don't think understand about me. I have friends that are communists. I have friends that are socialists. I have friends that are extreme to the right, extreme to the left. I have a lot of libertarian friends. All these people make up my friends. I don't always agree with everything they have to say. I have a lot of, friends in technology. We talk about things like seasteading, different concepts for government, all these things. I don't discriminate. I appreciate and value everybody's opinion. I think that's important, but I certainly have my opinion, and I let it be known. I call a duck a duck. If I see a duck walking down the street, I'm going to call it a freaking duck. And this is what I see now. The Brexit, a conspiracy, pre-planned. Organic qualities, yes. The Leavers should be congratulated. I congratulate you. Many of you are our own subscribers, so let me know that you voted Leave, and you should be congratulated. You are fighting back against this establishment elitism. I watched a great interview with Nigel Farage, which I think aired a couple days ago, where he talked about just that. But the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the pudding. I've got another report here, several links on this broadcasted today, that leading Brexit campaigner Boris Johnson says that he won't run for prime minister. An absolute shock statement. in a bombshell. Many thought he almost is kind of like the Donald Trump figure, almost kind of looks like Donald Trump. His like hair's like all over the place, almost like Conan or something. Just all over the. A lot of people thought Boris Johnson would succeed David Cameron, who, again, that was a ploy that he was going to step down. He knew this long in advance, knew the vote and the outcome, I think, at least in my humble opinion, was going to occur, put pressure. I actually think Boris Johnson's probably legit, but probably was threatened. He probably got a phone call. I mean, let's be honest. Hey, Boris, you shouldn't run. He's like, who's this on the other line? You know who this is. We're just going to say this once. Are you listening? You shouldn't run. Then he comes out today. He's like, I don't know if I'm going to run anymore. It's kind of like House of Cards, talked about his last episode. What was it? Frank Underwood. I think it was episode 4 that I'm on. I watched a little bit of this because it helps me understand the mainstream media agenda, the narrative, and it's good entertainment. Kevin Spacey, Frank Underwood, he gives a call to somebody, episode 2, I think, season 4. He basically puts it out there that if you don't do what he says, he's going to kill you. And see, Americans digest it, and they're like, oh, that's just normal. That's like normal politics, you know, Hillary Clinton, the divine entity, Jeb Bush, you know, and just, you know, they can do whatever they want. Probably pressured at the very least. If not a threat, probably pressured. Boris Johnson, one of the leading voices in the Brexit campaign, and the main man considered to be the favorite to replace outgoing Prime Minister David Cameron, delivered a bombshell Thursday when he announced he didn't want the job. Very convenient. Looks like the whole Leave campaign's in disarray. Very convenient, George Soros. Yeah, provides a perfect political vacuum for your EU superstate. New World Order agenda. One world order government. Perfect. This is just perfect. Former London Mayor Boris Johnson says he will not stand to succeed David Cameron. Very convenient. Mark Wright tweets out, I'm very surprised Boris Johnson ran the campaign to get us out of the EU and didn't have the guts to reestablish the country. Totally agree with you. You think something didn't happen? Obviously something did. He's being pressured by the people that really run the show. I talk about this with Donald Trump all the time, that I really believe Donald Trump is anti-establishment. Does he really know who he's dealing with? These people are incredibly powerful. They can make that phone call. They can turn you off. They can tell you, you shouldn't do this, Boris, or there might be consequences to your action. That's how evil, dogmatic, crazy, insane these people are. And they have all the power. All of it aggregated at the top. Something Nigel Farage and Boris here. It's one of the reasons why the Vote campaign voted to leave, because the people get it. They understand it. You know, Barack Obama lashed out at Donald Trump yesterday. I think he was in Canada. And he basically talked about, you know, now's not the time for, you know, populism and nativism and xenophobia and all these things. He's like on a rant, which I barely think is a rant. I mean, if you want to hear a rant, why don't you tune into our freaking show?
Okay, I'm going to stop right there. There's more, but I would have to fast forward through it. Now, when we look at Soros coming out with these statements, when we look at Boris, you know, stepping back, you have to wonder what's going on. You know, when you have the people that really inspired, you know, honestly, I think Nigel Farage would be probably a good bet, but the thing is, will he actually get that vote? I think if you see many of his speeches in the EU, in Parliament, you would be going, now I understand why they call him Britain's Ron Paul, because he has gotten that nickname. And we have to wonder what they're doing. You know, people are talking about the super state. People are talking about bringing in other countries into the EU, further trying to, you know, segregate Britain from any trade, I don't think that, like Christopher Green, that, you know, this was planned. I think that they had plans in case any country actually left the EU, what they would do in that case. Um, but they never actually expected it. That's why we're getting, you know, the many, you know, different ways they might go about this right now. But whatever the deal, they are going to do what they can to try to prevent other countries from leaving. If they can hurry up and get something passed where it takes that referendum to a different level, where it's something that they can't meet. You know, oh, you have to have this much percentage to actually vote to leave. You can't just have a, 51/49. You know, they're going to put, hey, you must have 95%. Now, I do want to get on to some other news. This whole Brexit thing, I've been talking about it for so long. Give me a second here. Okay. I kind of want to get into this Istanbul bombing before we move on to some domestic news. I kind of covered a little bit with the connection to the EU. I had a Ron Paul Liberty report. That's why I decided not to play the rest of AM TV. I wanted to get to this Ron Paul Liberty report. Istanbul bombing, who's at fault? Because we have multiple news agencies around the world, coming out going, well, ISIS said it was them, or, oh, it was actually the Kurds that did it, and no one really knows. But there are ways that you can go, actually, maybe there's a combination of people at fault here. But let's go ahead and get into this.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Ron Paul Liberty Report. With me today as co-host is Daniel McAdams. And Daniel, good to see you.
Good to see you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. Another incident, and it's stirring up a lot of people, rightfully so. We should be stirred up, and that is more bombing and more killing. And this one, this bombing in Istanbul at the airport involving 3 suicide bombers and 36 dead, 140 some wounded. It's very serious stuff, but it's really a mixture over there because we constantly work on trying to figure out who the rebels are, how many rebel groups there are, and whose side is everybody on, and how Russia's involved with it, and the Iranians are involved, Israel's involved, the United States is involved, the Turks are involved, and it gets very confusing. So all of a sudden now we have a major bombing in Turkey. And Turkey's been very much in the middle of all this, trying to pick and decide what is in their best interest, and it gets quite confusing. Even though, the Turks shot down a Russian plane not too long ago and there was conflict, it seems like that is actually, that conflict has softened a bit, but this thing still goes on and is the problem. But this killing is said, and most people right now, if you go out and talk to the average person watching television, and there's no reason for me to say it's not true, that ISIS had something to do with this. But ISIS didn't take credit for it. So that raises a little question. Somebody said, well, they don't take credit for things in Turkey. It goes on and on. But we do know that it was deliberate. It was done by somebody that is willing to commit violence and sacrifice their life for something they believe in. Now, the president of Turkey said that this incident that he was referring to, the people obviously had no objective, because in his view and in the views of the West, it makes no sense to just kill innocent people. But, I contend with, I contest that a bit, because I think there's always an objective. They could say that about 9/11, no objective. Well, they do have objectives. They do have reasons. They do have motivations. And maybe they're very, very strong if somebody's willing to sacrifice their life for a belief. So I always wondered about this excuse. They say, these people who do this, they're violent, evil people. But the one thing they always say is they are, cowards. I'm not so sure that's the right word for this. If they truly believe in this, and for some reason their belief structures are that they're doing something positive, I don't think they would do this if they thought this was totally negative. Yeah. So what we're going to do today, with your help, of course, is we're going to sort this out and find out who's at fault here. Of course, I think we're going to find a lot of people at fault, but this one particular incident, it is said that it's ISIS, and we know ISIS is over there, and some days we're on ISIS's side, it seems, and at other times that's what our whole foreign policy and our presidential election is all about. What are we going to do about ISIS? At the same time, people put it together and say, hey, why are we doing this? ISIS ends up with our weapons. So how does this all come together?
Well, one difference between the show that we do here and what you see on the mainstream media is they'll trot out expert after expert saying, I know exactly what happened, who did it, and why, and with such certainty. And we're not afraid to say we actually don't know the answer, but there are a lot of different factors that need to be looked at and analyzed in conjunction with each other, perhaps, to come to some kind of conclusion. I don't think there's a simple conclusion. But with regard to Turkey this past week, there were a few events that happened in a row that are quite interesting. At first, you had the Brexit vote, which really threatens to change the whole course of where the European Union is going. And Turkey has long wanted to join the European Union and has been put off for a number of years for a number of reasons. But I think the vote was the first in a series of huge factors. And Professor Mark Almond, who's on the board of the Institute for Peace and Prosperity, he tweeted out today, and I think this is very interesting. He said, triple suicide bombs at Istanbul airport come days after Turkey's triple reopening of links with Israel, Egypt, and Russia. And this just happened, as you alluded to earlier on, that Erdogan is trying to mend the fences with Russia after the shoot down of this Russian plane a few months ago, which, essentially crippled Turkey's economy, the tourism. The Russians don't go to the beaches. The increase in terrorism has crippled the economy. So he's looking to mend some fences and possibly to shift Turkey's policy, which has been in favor of those seeking to overthrow the Assad government in Syria. And just as he's signaling this shift, Russia, Egypt, and Israel, here these bombs go off and sucks him right back into Syria.
And it certainly looks like that could be related. I was interested in the political reactions here in this country. I mean, we're involved in something where, from the viewpoint of the Muslims and the Arabs and that whole region, is that it's them against not so much us, U.S., against the West, because all Europe is involved, and yet we're part of that. But they see the West as one that has been interfering in that area for a long time, all the way back, especially to World War I, deciding where the line should be. I keep thinking, and I've mentioned this quite frequently, about, it's too bad people don't really believe in self-determination and that secession is a legitimate moral position. And that was something that even Woodrow Wilson talked about, but I don't think he firmly believed in it. But so far, the reactions have been not so much to take this in the context of what is going on over there and our participation and all, but how the demagoguing goes on here in this country, because immediately afterwards, they say, well, what we need is more waterboarding. We need more torture. Now, how is an announcement right now to saying that we need to do more waterboarding when people, all they have to do is stir up and take pictures at Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, and no matter how much somebody said, well, it was morally justified and we needed to do it, politically speaking, it was bad PR, and it builds up a lot of animosity. But then there's the other group will say, what we have to do is get our leaders to say Islamic terrorism. No matter if they say, yes, there is a terrorist aspect of some people that are Islamic. No, Islamic terrorism. It goes on, and they'll do this almost like an obsession with political correctness on that. So, and others, if an event occurs here in this country, then it's all about guns. It's the gun that caused the problem. It has nothing to do with what our policies ought to be. So they get pretty excited, and I think sometimes overly excited compared to a lot of other things.
It's exactly true. The neocons would blame the Obama administration for this, saying that he didn't go in hard enough and strong enough to overthrow Assad. That's the reason he was weak against Assad, and that's what caused these kinds of attacks. They want to do more of what caused the problem in the first place. ISIS it's just been the two-year anniversary from their declaration of the caliphate in Syria and in the region. This sort of pseudo country that they set up. This is a new phenomenon, but it wasn't unpredicted. We've talked about this on the show before. A 2012 DIA memo that was declassified and released in part said this exact thing. If you stir things up in Syria to try to overthrow Assad, you'll see the rise of radical Islam, of jihadists. And they said that is what the players want, meaning Saudi Arabia, Qatar, possibly Israel, Turkey, and the other. This is what they want. Well, this is what they got. This action caused this reaction, yet their solution is to do more of what caused it.
Yeah, well, some in the conspiracy group, they would say, well, they really want the chaos. Out of chaos, they might get an advantage, so they're not so much worried. But they can't say, "Oh yeah, we're doing this to create chaos." They're never going to admit that. But some, I assume, would actually be delighted in it and order to take advantage of it. What they don't know, or what they don't realize, there's always unintended consequences, and there's unintended costs, and all kinds of blowback from this, and then they just go on, and conditions get worse. But what disturbs me, this one not as much as some of the incidents that occur in this country, which are very, very serious. We've had several now that are quite serious. But, when you look at a scheme of things on how much the West and the NATO and the United States has contributed to death and destruction in the Middle East, I mean, it has to be over 1 million people from that region who were killed because we had a foreign policy that said, you will do what we tell you, or we're going to bomb you, or we're going to start a war. And we started wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and things like that. So there's a lot of people. But now the reaction is, one person, insists on wanting to reinstitute torture, and that'll solve the problem. The other say, if they just say radical Islam. But the whole point is the people aren't going to change under those benefits. They're going to have to look at it more seriously than that and see the relationship. As bad as it is, and how horrible it is, what happened in this country, since, 9/11, there's less than 100 people killed. Horrible. Because if you say that, that means you don't care about, American citizens. But compared to what? This 100, get the attention where the American people get so terrified by the demagogues that they're willing to give up half of them want to give up the Second Amendment, the other half want to give up the Fourth Amendment. And that's going to be the solution. Oh, the government should investigate everybody, put us on a list. If you don't have anything to hide, put your name on a list. Oh yeah, it's those guns. Those people believe in guns, and they concentrate on that, and they never say, well, let's stop and think about this. Let's put this in perspective. Maybe the attacks aren't so bad as they claim. And maybe we have something to do with that. Maybe we could think, about our policy, and yet you don't want to be called, unpatriotic, or un-American.
And that doesn't mean that American citizens are guilty of what their government does. What it does mean is they have an obligation to get educated, to turn off the mainstream media and tune into alternative sources, and to then use their knowledge that they've acquired to pressure their congressional leaders to change course.
I wonder if there are some people in this country that still don't quite understand that there's a coalition in the media and the military-industrial complex. Yeah. I mean, there are close connections there. But if you look at the major media, you can't say, there was a time when I used to think, well, liberals tend to be less interventionist, and they finally got that way on Vietnam, and they had this image. But where would you go on the major networks to say, well, I want a fair and balanced approach to find out, what really is happening without somebody demagoguing this or representing the military-industrial complex and saying that if you don't support more weapons, then somehow you're un-American. Candidates throughout this election all been for rebuilding our military. That just slays me that we have to rebuild the military that's bigger than everybody else put together.
And do more of what caused the problem. You alluded earlier to this number, and I think it's an important number. I think it was International Security Journal that had a chart that we looked at before the show, that violent jihadist attacks on U.S. soil since 9/11, and that includes from Orlando all the way down to, I forget what it was in 2002, but 94 Americans killed on U.S. soil. As you point out, tragic and terrible, yet think of what they have been able to change from the Patriot Act on in our society.
Yeah, and so that is, whom should we fear the most?
Government.
The jihadists haven't taken away our liberties. It's our liberties that we have to protect, our property, our contract rights, these kind of things that make the country move along. And, introducing the notion to a lot of people who have never heard about it, and that's the non-aggression principle. Right. That to me is so simple and clear-cut about if you're interested in peace and prosperity, just get more people to agree that they shouldn't initiate violence against somebody else for what they want and they're not entitled to. But no, most people have a different interpretation that entitlement is something else. Business people are entitled to the help of the Federal Reserve and government spending. Poor people who have been victimized by a bad economic system say, well, we're poor now and it was all the government's fault, so we're entitled to our bailout too. It's sort of logical, but what they have to admit is what we're facing today. We look and sort of laugh and say, oh, look, Venezuela, they're socialists. They're stupid socialists. Yeah. But there's a lot that we do that are it's socialistic and it's fascistic. It's government controls. It's collusion between big business and big government. And I don't see that separation coming very soon.
Well, Susan Rice, who is our favorite national security advisor, she's one of the authors of the idea of humanitarian interventionism, but she tweeted out this morning that something like, our hearts go out to the victims in Istanbul, but this will not affect our resolve. I mean, we're going to keep doing more of it.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to offer a solution, and you admitted at the beginning it's not that easy to come up and say, this is what we do. But I think there are some things that we could say that we shouldn't do, And I think back in recent history, one of the most damaging things in that area, of course, going in and declaring war in Iraq, or not declaring war, just going and starting a war in Iraq, that, of course, was horrendous. But I think what Obama did, and he has a disappointment, the peace candidate said Assad has to go. That is our position. Things have not gone well in that part of the world since that was our position, and people sort of joined us. But then they argued, well, you have to lead the charge. You buy us the weapons and get them, but we just can't seem to put it together. But for these conflicts to be settled, the least outside interference, of course, the better. And it just seems a long way from home for us to be sending our troops over to.
Sure, and they never learned from their mistakes. The State Department, Mark Toner was asked, I think it was yesterday, the Pentagon is launching a new train and equip program for Syrian rebels. Remember, the last one produced about 11 fighters and cost $500 million. They're going to launch a new one. They're undeterred because, after all, it's not their money. But they asked him, well, what makes you think it's going to go any better this time? And he said, well, we've learned from our mistakes.
Well, compare that to how much these jihadist fighters are paid. They grab, it's risky to say it, but they grab sort of the moral high ground because they're defending their homeland, and they can get radical. But nobody goes out and spends billions and billions of dollars like we do in trying to organize people like that. So all that training won't work if you don't have the people who really want to be involved. That's why, just get out. I think if Obama had not designed the policy of Assad has to go, I doubt if there'd have been need for the Russians to come in and have to react like that. They wouldn't have been invited by Sadat to come into Syria.
Well, the U.S. ambassador in Syria, Robert Ford, at the time, the protest started in 2011. He immediately went and started meeting with the protesters, egging them on toward violence. If he had not engaged in that activity, if the U.S. had not pushed this regime change, there probably would have been some violence at the protests, which is regrettable, absolutely. But they would have found a way to work things out. Some sort of compromise would have been worked out. Thousands and thousands would have not been killed that have been killed. But then again, the military-industrial complex wouldn't make all that money either.
That's for sure. All we can do is do our best to give another opinion compared to what you see on national television. But I mentioned the two simple things that we could endorse, and that is self-determination and the principle of secession. We like the idea of pseudo-secession of the British out of the European Union, these kind of things. And that would go a long way. But the non-intervention philosophy of foreign policy would go a long way. It's just antagonistic for so many people, and we suffer the consequences. And the advice of the founders was to stay out of these entangling alliances, and yet we're into so many of them. And those principles have been endorsed by Republicans and Democrats. People just have lost touch with the reality of what it might be like if we lived in a free country. They say, oh, no, we need trade management because we need to manage it so it's free. And at the same time, all you want is individual liberty and your right to keep your money you earn and the right to spend it any way you want. And guess what? You'd have free trade and you would have prosperity and you would have incentives and you would have, if we allowed the market to work, you'd have a sound currency. There's no reason why we can't get the American people to consider this, especially since our economy is collapsing and the foreign policy is in shambles and we can't afford it anymore and the current system is ending. It affords a wonderful opportunity for us to present the case for liberty. That's what we intend to do, to continue to make the case for liberty. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.
Ron Paul Liberty Report on YouTube, RonPaulLibertyReport.com. Subscribe. Now, whether this guy be, a rebel from continual war over in the Middle East, our continual involvement over there is not helping anything. And if anything, it's hurting us, which I think is pretty evident to people. There are a few people that benefit from it, people that are involved in the military-industrial complex, even, the contracted companies that build things for war. that's probably one of the best reasons not to support wars is companies are making it a pressure into war so that the military can continue to go through what stockpiles they have to invest in new technology. And our budget and our military scale is not weak. And the Republicans that are going to push for a stronger government, including Trump, or, stronger military, including Trump, are going to have to push for war, are going to have to continue to push for military spending and taxes. And then you have Trump coming out pushing torture. We should waterboard. No. They'll tell you anything you want to hear, whether it's the truth or not. If you don't tell me the truth, I'll kill you next time. They're probably wishing you would. At that point. Okay, I told you guys I want to get into domestic news for the last half hour here. Sorry. Stupid pop-ups. Okay. I had this one that kind of really struck me today. Let me reload this. Okay, here we go. Disabled teen bloodied by TSA agents. Now remember, this is kind of tied to this whole foreign policy, and, we end up suffering from it. The TSA is part of how we suffer from it. Our rights are taken away and we're treated like prisoners. Bloodied by TSA agents after intrusive search confused and frightened her. Memphis, Tennessee, a special needs teenager returning home from a brain tumor treatment at St. Jude Hospital was left battered, bloodied, and in jail after an encounter with TSA agents at a security checkpoint. It's a trip they made for 17 years, according to the teen's mother, Shirley Cohen. But this one was unlike any that had experienced before and hopefully never have to experience again. Upon arriving at the security checkpoint with their mother, Hannah Cohen, 19, set off a metal detector and was identified for further screening by TSA agents. They wanted to do further screening. She was reluctant, but she didn't understand what they were about to do, said her mother, Shirley Cohen. Shirley Cohen, upon realizing her daughter's confusion at the situation, attempted to tell the TSA agents that her daughter is partially deaf, blind, and one eye paralyzed, and easily confused. However, police restrained her from doing so, she was kept away from the TSA agents, according to WREG3. And, of course, it wants to freeze up on me. There we go. The frightened and confused disabled teen not understanding what was transpiring due to her disabilities, attempted to flee. She was violently taken to the ground, causing the young woman, who had just finished a brain tumor treatment, to hit her head on the ground. She was trying to get away from them, but in the next instant, one of them had her down on the ground and hit her head on the floor. Shirley Cohen said there was blood everywhere. The young woman, who should have been celebrating the end of her treatment at St. Jude, was ultimately taken from Memphis International Airport in handcuffs. Terrified and bloodied, she was arrested and booked in jail for the night. Here we were with nowhere to go, not even a toothbrush. Our bags had gone to Chattanooga, said Shirley Cohen. While all charges against Hannah Cohen were subsequently dismissed, the family has filed a lawsuit against the Memphis International Airport, TSA, and the Memphis Airport Police. The organizations have refused to comment due to pending litigation. But Sari Kashetz of the TSA released a statement that said passengers can call ahead of time and learn more about the screening process for their particular needs or medical situation. Shirley Cohen can't believe that her daughter had to needlessly go through such a traumatic experience after having already been through so much in her 19 years. And, you know, when you look at all this, you know, the response from the TSA, you know, you can call ahead and find out our procedures. No, she's been doing this for, what did it say, 17 or 19 years? She is, 17 years. They have been flying back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. 17 years. And the TSA, you know, is put in this type of position, and then all of a sudden, you know, oh, you know, we understand you've been doing this for 17 years, but we don't care because now you're just going to have to do what we want you to do. And it's bullshit because it's not solving any issues. It's not helping anybody. It's costing taxpayer money. And then you have these thuggish agents that aren't even actual, you know, police. It's just amazing. And there's been more and more talk, definitely after this case, where airports are talking again about, you know, do we want TSA in our airports? Well, guess what? Now TSA wants to set up outside the airport. Oh, goody. Now you can have a line of cars. Now they'll have to search your car, pat you down outside your car. You know, what are we doing? You have to be brain dead to actually believe this is good. Don't you think that they believe this is really good? Maybe a few brain dead individuals. This is a complete fallacy if you believe it to be security. But again, they want power, they want money, they want your fear. It's just, it's unbelievable, really. I did want to kind of put a little update out there for. I told people about the sheriff here in Indiana in Elkhart County. Sheriff Brad Rogers, when he stood up to the FDA, basically told them they better have a warrant if they want to inspect this guy's organic and raw milk farm. And I have an article here from don'tcomply.com. And it says, let me scroll down a little bit farther. And this was going on back in 2011. It says here the big agricultural-backed FDA, along with the Department of Justice, started the harassment approximately 4 years ago just because the hardworking farmer was producing raw milk and supplying some of the organic co-ops. Thankfully, the government's steady war on small farmers was halted. In this particular case, Sheriff Rogers authored a 600-word breakdown of the ordeal for the local newspaper in his contribution column called Ask the Sheriff. Especially the FDA was inspecting his farm without a warrant as much as every 2 weeks. Typically, inspections occur annually. The Department of Justice has subpoenaed him for grand jury in Michigan, in which he was to bring his production documents. The feds wanted to make this farmer an example. Rogers continued, my research concluded no one was getting sick from this distribution of this raw milk. It appeared to be harassment from the FDA and the DOJ and making unconstitutional searches. In my opinion, the farmer told me that he no longer wishes to cooperate with the inspections of his property. Sheriff Rogers wrote to the DOJ and let them know that he would take action if any federal inspectors came without a signed warrant that specified probable cause to give a clear reason why they needed to conduct their invasive searches. I understand that you have made recent requests to the farmer for documents and to appear before a grand jury, and he has had a number of inspections and attempted inspections on his farm within Elkhart County. This has noticed that any further attempts to inspect this farm without a warrant signed by a judge based on probable cause will result in federal inspectors' removal or arrest for trespassing by my officers or I. In addition, any further action is taken by the federal government on the farmer while he is in Elkhart County, I will expect that you or federal authorities contact my office prior to such action. I will expect you to forward this information to your federal associates, including the FDA. Soon after this email was sent, the farmer got a certified letter in the mail from DOJ that notified him that the grand jury subpoena was now canceled. Now, over 4 years later, the FDA inspectors and the DOJ have not returned to the property since I interposed for the farmer. Some have suggested it was my interposition that caused the feds to stand down. I have no way of knowing for sure, but the evidence would suggest so, wrote the sheriff. Sheriff Rogers exclaimed, your local elected officials can stay the tide of federal overreach if they apply just a little backbone in supporting and defending the Constitution. Expect it, demand it. Some bloggers and natural food writers have held me as a hero. I'm no hero. I'm just doing my job, he added. Many of our parents, grandparents drank raw milk and have survived. There are risks with raw milk, but careful handling and storage will mitigate the risk. Many people believe that raw milk is healthier to drink than pasteurized versions. There is no law in Indiana that prohibits the distribution of raw milk in this fashion. In short, I don't believe the government should be our nanny in telling us what we can or cannot drink or eat. These key actions performed by Sheriff Rogers are right, and this is what the people should expect to receive from their county sheriff and other elected officials. You can read the rest of that article. There's a little clip to go with it at don'tcomply.com. Okay, let's move along here. Okay. Now, with technology advancing the way it is, and America and other developed countries are so reliant on technology anymore nowadays, it's important to be very careful. And, the whole thing about, you know, Zuckerberg puts tape over his camera. Okay, yeah, that that's something that I've been doing for a very long time since they've been, putting cameras in laptops. And I have one here from We Are Change I wanted to get to. New ways you are being spied on and how to prevent it. And I think it's really important to keep up with this stuff as technology progresses, and even keep up on some of the, the more dark web internet hacking, to also try to mitigate the prying in on your privacy. So let's go on and get onto this clip here. Excuse me.
In this video, we're not only going to tell you all of the new ways that you are being spied on, but also helpful tips and techniques on how to safeguard yourself and your privacy from the corporate globalists who ultimately want to get rid of freedom of speech, critical thinking, and silence you through fear. First of all, we all know Google. They track everything we search for, but they also track the date, time, location, and also now audio of when we search for particular items on Google. It has just come out through Google's search software that they have been collecting conversations for years now. And you could actually go into your Google records and listen to your private conversation. This article, which will be in the description below, actually shows you how you could find out those recordings, delete them, and prevent this from happening, at least on your end. Again, we knew this was happening for a number of years now. We tried to warn you all the way back in 2006 that this was going to happen. This was rumored to be happening years ago, and of course, with the controversy, it was stopped. But now it is happening, and we knew this. I mean, every time people use the OK Google function, the voice recognition function that turns on Google for you and is voice activated, we know that Google has to be listening to you 24/7 in order to allow that voice recognition to work. There was a lot of controversy a few years ago when they first launched this software and when they first launched this technology, because they actually had a commercial, and in that commercial it said, "OK Google, call mom." And people who were watching the television, people who fell asleep watching the television, their phones were automatically activated and called their mothers 3 o'clock in the morning, and it created a huge stir and controversy. But so this is nothing new. But also, you need to be aware, when you're walking in the streets, you are also not safe from actual spying billboards that track where you go. They use cellular, Wi-Fi, and your location information from your mobile phones as you walk past advertisements that are already in use in Times Square without your knowledge or consent. Clear Channel is doing this right now with a technology called radar. The government is actually investigating this as we are speaking. Even when you are away from your computer, from your cell phone, you are not safe. There are new Samsung televisions with disclaimers by Samsung saying, quote, "Be careful of what you say in front of your smart TVs. Do not have private conversations in front of your televisions." These are actual disclaimers that Samsung is telling its own customers because of their voice recognition recording system that records everything you say 24/7, and then Samsung actually shares that information with third third-party companies, because that's what they do. This is an article that actually shows you how to disable that feature on your end to stop the television from listening to you. And again, it's not just billboards, it's not just Google, it's not just freaking your televisions. It's also Amazon Echo, it's Google Now, it's Siri, there's so many different softwares and new technology that ultimately listen to you. This is another article which will be in the description below that shows you how to stop these devices from listening to you. And again, blenders, freaking microwaves, toasters now have Wi-Fi signals, Wi-Fi capabilities enabled within them. And of course, many of them are made by dumb corporations who don't even secure the Wi-Fi signal on your toaster, and random hackers could gain access to your Wi-Fi, to all of your information, just by walking past your house now. This is how inept these corporations are. And of course, on your end, you could delete these recordings. On your end, you could change some of these settings. But with the government, you cannot. After Edward Snowden came out, it was revealed that the government could power on your phone that has been turned off and listen to everything you are saying when you think the phone is completely off. The NSA and the government has had this power for a very long time. They denied it. They lied to you that they even had it. But because of Edward Snowden, we now know that this is the truth. Even though we could safeguard ourselves on our end, ultimately, the government could listen to anything, and with all of these devices having Wi-Fi signals and microphones, they ultimately could listen to anything and everything that they want. Now we have Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, and even Donald Trump saying Edward Snowden should have went through the official chain of command. Our government is saying you should have reported this to your superiors, to your higher-ups. And of course, new documents are showing that Edward Snowden actually did try this. And of course, the government was once again caught lying. This is an extremely dangerous time that we are in, especially with the government pushing for new programs, new laws, new regulations that are going to target thought criminals, that will set up a sweeping mandate to monitor and collect controversial speech, starting with so-called anti-government, anti-establishment speech. Speech like you're hearing right now. And with these new programs and with these new mandates, we are seeing this envisioned right in front of us, as just a few days ago, we have Facebook, Twitter, Google, and Microsoft coming together to tackle online hate speech. Again, what is hate speech? It's ultimately disagreeing with the status quo, with the establishment, not physically hurting anyone, but using your voice to express a difference of opinion. And the people in the establishment who are threatened by opinions, they are using these laws to throw innocent men and women into jail, like we saw in Canada just a few months ago, when a man was thrown in jail and faced jail time over an argument on Twitter with feminists. We've seen in the UK people being arrested for offensive comments about these open borders. We have seen in Germany people visited by the police for reporting and documenting how Muslims were celebrating different terrorist attacks and also different things that were happening in this world all over Europe right now. There's not only a pure control grid system watching with everything that's happening on social media, but there is a system in place that is putting people in jail for voicing their disagreement with the status quo. With all of these devices, with the government listening to your private conversations, we are headed towards a world where if you make a comment, If you say anything, even in the privacy of your own home, we could face a future where you will be arrested for sharing or even having an opinion, like we have seen in 1984 with the telescreens listening inside of your own home. And if you did anything against the system, you would be automatically thrown in jail. This is happening already on the social media level. We are only one step away from this happening through our private conversations because the capabilities are there. The corporations see this as an incentive financially. The government sees this as an incentive to keep their control grips on all of us. And the only thing stopping it, it's me, it's you, it's all of us getting this important information out there, because all the people out there are not aware of this. The mainstream media keeps this away from you for a very specific reason. Share this video, get the information out there, because it first takes to be informed, then to be motivated, and then to be activated. But together, with getting this information out there as a first step, we could make sure that this does not happen. Support us on Patreon so we could be fully free and fully independent, away from any government or corporate coercion, so we could work for you by investing just $1 a month on Patreon and keeping our independent organization running, expanding, and growing, fighting these corporate globalists who ultimately are just enemies of freedom. Subscribe. We're going to have a lot more important information coming.
We are Change. We are Change.org. We are Change on YouTube. Go check them out. Subscribe. Now, the spying is one thing that you have to worry about with technology. This, age of day it's when you look at it, it's one of those things. Everything becomes so much more convenient. And you like that aspect of it. But then you realize, hey, there's a camera. There's a microphone. It's always on me. Well, that cell phone, then you're like, hold on. It's a tracker. It's a spy tool. And when does it get to a point where, things that you talk about or do in private, discussions that you have, ideas that you have, potentially, could get you black bagged one day if the government gets to that point. Another thing that we have to worry about, which is why it's very important to spread UCY.TV around, spread alternative media outlets around people. You go, why do you support so many other outlets? Not more just yourself. And it's one of those things that we're in a battle right now. I don't always agree with everyone, but there's people that are trying to spread as much truth as possible, that are really going into the depths that will never see the light of day on mainstream media. And it's important that we have multiple outlets for this, because it makes more targets. That makes it harder for them to shut down the flow of information, even though they basically have a pretty good grasp on the internet right now. We still have other outlets and other ways of getting messages and information through the internet. When you look at some of these big corporations like, Google. I have one here and I've talked about this because I even got to watch the interview of Eric Schmidt and what was his name? I can't remember right now. But the Google executives that really said a lot to me about the egotistical beliefs that they have. And one had to do with Eric Schmidt talking about being able to, you know, things that incite violence. We can basically access from the internet, and talking all this about, well, it came pretty clear to me as censorship. What's hate speech? Something that might incite violence. What might incite violence? The truth about your government screwing you over, or things that come out like that. That could incite violence if a population's already at a breaking point, and then more corruption comes out. Protests. So basically, he wants to stop any rebellion to the system, is how I read what he was saying. And that was on Glenn Beck. And I have one here from dailymail.com or .co.uk. Google chairman wants to censor the internet for hate speech. Spell check for terrorism is needed, says Eric Schmidt. Technology groups have a duty to combat terrorism using tools such as a hate speech spell checker, according to Google chairman Eric Schmidt. Schmidt claims a widespread system capable of doing this would de-escalate tensions on social media and remove videos before they spread. It follows an announcement by the White House that is engaged in conversations with the technology community about taking common sense measures to prevent terrorism. It's our responsibility to demonstrate that stability and free expression go hand in hand, wrote Schmidt in an opinion piece for the New York Times. We should build tools to help de-escalate tensions on social media, sort of like spell checkers, but for the hate and harassment. Schmidt said that technology platforms should target terrorists' social media accounts and take down extremist video content. The video of Google, Facebook, and Twitter are already attempting to do this, or the likes of Google, Facebook, are attempting to do this. However, Schmidt did not give any specific details about his proposed spell checkers for hate. As with all great advances in technology, expanded web access has also brought with it some serious challenges like threats to free speech, qualms about surveillance, and fears of online terrorist activity, Mr. Schmidt wrote. For all the good people can do with new tools and new inventions, there are always some who will seek to do harm. Ever since there's been fire, there's been arson. Without this type of leadership from government, from citizens, from tech companies, the internet could become a vehicle for further disaggregation of poorly built societies and the employment or empowerment of the wrong people and the wrong voices. Quartz points out that people can't agree on the definition of hate speech, so building algorithms to balance the fine line would be difficult. On Monday, White House spokesman Josh Earnest said that U.S. government wanted to avoid the urge to trample a bunch of civil liberties. But it wants technology companies to work together to combat terrorist threat. What it wants companies, particularly those that run social media platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, to do differently, it could not say. The president's spokesman contended this is a subject of ongoing conversation among law enforcement professionals, among academics and others, about how to resolve these questions about free speech rights, about personal privacy, but also protecting the country. In his Sunday evening address to the nation, President Barack Obama said, as the internet erases the distance between countries, we see growing efforts by terrorists to poison the minds of people like the Boston Marathon bombers and the San Bernardino killers. I will urge high-tech and law enforcement leaders to make it harder for terrorists to use technology to escape from justice. The Obama administration has already backed away from legislation that would create backdoors into encrypted technologies that would allow the government to monitor communications. Top technology firms have said such loopholes would make their programs vulnerable to hacking. After a horrific tragedy like the Paris attacks, we naturally search for solutions. Weakening encryption is not a solution, Information Technology Industry Council President Dean Garfield told Reuters after the deadly assault. The organization represents Apple, Google, Microsoft, and other high-profile tech companies. An administration official told Reuters on Sunday that the federal government wants to make sure that encryption is not utilized in a way that allows for a dark space for terrorist groups to be plotting operations and attacks. Asked directly what outcome the president foresees and if it includes monitoring social media sites, White House Press Secretary John Ossoff said that afternoon, this is a question that technology companies, I think, are largely going to have to answer for themselves. They will do that in conversation with law enforcement officials and the government's experts, he said. Obviously, social media sites like Facebook and Twitter recognize that their tools were created in the context of an open society and the kind of atmosphere that allowed them to innovate and to create new technologies that have allowed people to test relationships, even if they are divided by time and space, is powerful, Ernest told reporters. He said those companies have their own interests in not seeing these tools be used to incite or radicalize or call for people to carry out acts of terrorism. Of course, they have a responsibility that they obviously believe strongly in, which is protecting free speech. There are the types of conversations that Obama administrations and technology community have been engaged in for some time now, the White House official said. The official who spoke to Reuters on background was more blunt. Obama wants social media companies to cut off access when a user crosses the line from protected speech into active terrorist plotting. This is a deeply concerning line that we believe has to be addressed. There are cases where we believe that individuals should not have access to social media for that purpose, the official told Reuters. The Democratic frontrunner for president and former Secretary of State to Obama, Hillary Clinton, said in her speech on Sunday that tech companies need to deny online space to terror groups. They are using websites, social media, chat rooms, and other platforms to celebrate beheadings, recruit future terrorists, and call for attacks. We should work with host companies to shut them down, she said. But one thing that we're seeing is constitutional, conservative, libertarian groups that get censored more than the big radicals. We end up seeing hacker groups take over the radical sites, like on Twitter, they took over a bunch of ISIS ones with the gay flag and, you know, the gay pride flag. And, you know, it was the hackers. It wasn't the Twitter. The one where Facebook wouldn't take down the that Trump, one that was threatening to harm Trump, they didn't take that Facebook page down. They might eventually, but they took down other pages that people would either spam, flagging it, or who knows what reason they took it down, but no legitimate reason that most people could see. Okay, let's see where we're at here. Okay. Now let me see if I can get to this one article I wanted to cover. Okay. This one out of the Libertarian Republic. Was Bill Clinton plea bargaining with the Attorney General? Many people already know this going on, which is raising legitimate concerns. And we know how the Clintons work. When Bill Clinton and Attorney General Loretta Lynch met privately Monday in her jet in Phoenix, Arizona, some speculated he may have been pleading for his wife, who is under investigation by the FBI and the Department of Justice, but the former president may also have been pleading for himself, according to a former federal prosecutor, while political observers are focused on former Secretary of State and all but certain Democrat presidential nominee Hillary Clinton. Her husband also had been a principal player behind the scenes at the Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation. Former U.S. Attorney Joseph Genova told the Daily Caller News Foundation the former president is at least a witness in 2 criminal investigations. Probably a subject in 2 criminal investigations. He is a person of interest officially to the Department of Justice, he said flatly. Both the FBI and Justice Department have launched investigations into Hillary Clinton's use of a private server and email address for the official U.S. government business during her tenure as the nation's chief diplomat. But investigators are also reportedly investigating public corruption links between Hillary's work at the State Department with large foreign donors to the Clinton Foundation, many of which were orchestrated by her husband. Genova said the problem with the secretive meeting at the private aircraft section of the Phoenix airport had nothing to do with appearances, but was a violation of the Justice Department's policies. It is very important to realize this isn't just a question of her judgment. The question of the Department of Justice policy on communicating with a side in a case. DeGenova told the DCNF. Given Bill Clinton's legal status as a party to the federal investigations, DeGenova said Lynch should not, under any circumstances, have met with him because strict Justice Department rules require impartiality among federal policy Sorry. Having an issue here. Top law enforcement official Bill Clinton, according to the department, is a person of interest. What the hell is she doing meeting with a person of interest, no matter what the reason? You can read the rest of it at the libertarianrepublic.com. Okay. libertarianrepublic.com. Now, before I get into this last article, I wanted to cover, again, support UCY.tv and other alternative media. One way you can support UCY is one, by listening and supporting the host here. Another way, you can go to UCY.tv. There's a tab there at the top, support UCY.tv. You can donate. Also, you're looking to buy some gear or whatever through Amazon. If you scroll down towards the bottom of UCY.tv, there's an Amazon button. You click that button, and it'll take you to Amazon, and you can shop through them. Same great prices, same great shipping rate. No extra charges, but UCY gets a little kickback to help cover operating costs on the network side of the deal. Also, you're seeing metal prices start going up. Something I've been doing, precious metals, seeds, all that. I choose Amagi Metals. That's who I choose to go through for my purchasing of precious metals. If you go to anti-tyrannynews.com/metal, it'll take you straight to Amagi Metal. Again, same great prices, same great shipping rate. And at the same time, we get a little kickback from that, help cover our operating cost on this end. And, again, don't ever put all your eggs in one basket. You see gold, silver going up. You see your 401k dwindle. There's people that been, telling you that this is coming. And this was emotional. I talked about this last broadcast, emotional reaction to the Brexit, and also a little combination of a correction for the inflated value of the pound through the EU. And when you look at where things go, it tends to see these bubbles that burst in our economy, and we're getting close to this inflated. Oh, the economy's doing better, or we added this many jobs. They don't like to talk about how many we lost, and the true number. They'll tell you, unemployment rates, and we gained this many jobs, which those two statistics don't show reality. So that's something that's important to talk about. So, you're watching the wealthy people even take their money out of stocks and put it in gold and silver. So, they didn't get where they are because they didn't see things coming. We knew oil prices were going to drop and gas prices were going to drop when we seen certain people pull out of oil and gas. We seen it coming. There's an article at reason.com that I found kind of interesting because it's something that people don't like to talk about too much. And it's titled, What Will Gun Controllers Do When Americans Ignore an Assault Weapons Ban? They want to talk about banning them. They don't want to try to bring up what would happen if people said no. Because then they have to admit they will use violence. Prohibition was kneecapped by Americans' widespread refusal to stop producing, selling, and drinking booze. Millions of Americans smoked marijuana decades before majority sentiment crept toward legalizing the stuff. Gays and lesbians not only superstitiously lived viciously lived and loved when they were targeted by the law, they also famously and righteously stopped cops who raided the Stonewall Inn, ultimately precipitating liberalization, and restrictions on exporting encryption were eased only after cryptographers illegally exported code, even printing it on T-shirts as an act of civil disobedience. But in the wake of Omar Machin's bloody rampage in Orlando, gun control advocates think that overcoming the passionate opposition of firearms owners and imposing a ban on a difficult-to-define class of assault weapons is a swell idea whose time has come. This prohibition will somehow be different. Those who defend the easy accessibility of assault weapons should meet these families and explain why that makes sense. President Obama tooted last week, but the moralizer-in-chief failed to make sense himself, calling the outlawing of a category of device that doesn't really exist. The term assault weapon itself, of disputed origin, is a thorn in the side of gun enthusiasts who point out that the differences between assault weapons and other semi-automatics are largely cosmetic and don't increase the gun's lethality, explains Slate senior editor Rachel Larimore in a piece taking the media to task for reporting and editorializing on guns without getting the facts straight. One fact here, I got that before this whole assault weapon, the ATF had at one time defined assault weapon as a fully automatic gun. They changed that definition for political reasons. I don't know if the ATF did, officially, but the media, the politics of the game, start using it for something with a pistol grip in black, folding stock. Because these guns are really just ordinary rifles, it's hard for legislators to effectively regulate them without banning half the handguns in the country, those that are semi-automatic and or have detachable magazines, and many hunting rifles as well, added UCLA law professor and gun control advocate Adam Winkler, who has actually done his research. Winkler also emphasized why gun owners are so hardened in their opposition to further legal restriction. Gun control advocates ridicule the NRA's claim that the government is coming to take away people's guns when then try to outlaw perhaps the most popular rifle in the country. Gun owners' response is best summarized by one of their more popular slogans of recent years. Mulan Lop, usually translated as come and take them. That was Spartan King Leonidas' legendary response to the Persian demand that he and his men surrender their weapons before the Battle of Thermopylae. The gun owners mean what they say in the assault weapons context can be inferred from the 5% compliance rate achieved by New York's recent registration requirement for such firearms, or from the 15% compliance rate in neighboring Connecticut. In 1990, even before opposition had become so hardened, California experienced similar resistance to its original restrictions on assault weapons. As a one-year registration period draws toward the end on December 31st, only about 7,000 weapons of an estimated 300,000 in private hands in the state have been registered, the New York Times reported. When New Jersey went a step further and banned the sale and possession of assault weapons, 947 people registered their rifles as sporting guns for target shooting. 888 rendered them inoperable, and 4 surrendered them to police. That's out of an estimated 100,000 to 300,000 firearms affected by the law. The New York Times concluded a bit really more than a year after New Jersey imposed the toughest assault weapons law in the country, the law is proving difficult, if not impossible, to enforce. Some advocates of restrictions will object that they don't want to take away existing guns. They just want to prevent the acquisition of new ones. That narrative becomes complicated when officials like New York Governor Andrew Cuomo muse that confiscation could be an option, a sentiment echoed by the New York Times editorial board. So they want to threaten people. Stay tuned here on UCY.TV. Thank you for tuning in this evening. It's, a fight that we have to continue to get information out there that the mainstream media would like to construe for you. And, what would a gun confiscation in the United States look like? That's something for people to really ponder. Is this a path that we should suggest in the first place? But we see the mainstream media continue to push for it. And when we see what they do in the Middle East, what they do other places, Fast and Furious, Benghazi, ISIS, the drug cartels, our own government, our own police forces, we have to, really take this and lean on it and see what we believe. Thank you again for tuning in. Stay tuned here on UCY.TV.
Aussie Skateboard.